This is your class live recording for your essay, Age of Revolutions for World History B. So the first thing that I always want to go over when I'm talking about an essay is the thesis. And to do that, I always like to go back to the prompt. This prompt specifically says, consider some of the key developments you've read about in your lessons for this unit, and write an essay of 600 words or more explaining how the 19th century age of revolutions had transformed many areas in the world politically, socially, and economically. So we know instantly our thesis should talk about the 19th century, particularly this concept of an age of revolution, and that your main body paragraphs will discuss the political, social, and economic repercussions of this time period that, again, we call the Age of Revolution. So some major things to talk about for your main points, and again, these are your options here. You can discuss the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Meiji Restoration, and the Enlightenment. Again, you're going to want to talk about social, political, and economic repercussions, and these are great topics for you to be talking about when you're talking about these kind of changes that are happening to the world because of all these revolutions that are happening. So this is what your essay should look like. Again, you're going to write a 5-paragraph essay, so introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. This is going to be pretty easy, about 100 words, maybe 120 words per paragraph. So you should be able to knock that out pretty easily. Your introductions, particularly when you're writing historical essays, should include some historical information. I always ask for background information, what's happening pre this age of revolutions, and why is the time so ripe for revolutions to be happening. I mean, revolutions don't happen every day, but it seemed like during this period, every time we turned around, there's another revolution happening. So some background information here is going to be good. Again, your main points will discuss the social, political, and economic changes that are happening in the world. And then again, going back to your thesis, which will have something to do with, this is the age of revolution. Your body paragraphs should be pretty similar to each other. We'll have your topic sentence. So, for example, if we decide we're going to start with the economic changes that are happening, our topic sentence might say something like, the Age of Revolution brought about a wide variety of economic changes throughout the world. That's my topic sentence. I'm talking about my thesis, which is the Age of Revolution, and I'm talking about one of my main points, which is the economic changes. I will provide evidence. This can come from your lessons, this can come from outside research. If it is outside research, please include it in quotation marks so that I know that it comes from somewhere else, and cite your sources so that I know you're not intentionally stealing from someone else and you meant to give them credit. When you give evidence, again, include it in quotes. So my evidence for an economic change might say, because of the Russian Revolution, the economy in Russia stalled and 10,000 people went hungry. It's definitely an economic repercussion here. So if that's my evidence, I have to explain why that's important. So again, we're talking about Russia, which is a huge nation, and at that time was participating in World War I. Economically, they could no longer afford to participate in the war. So, 10 million people starving is 10 million less people who can fight in a war. So I need to explain my evidence and always tie it back to my thesis. The Russians were ripe for revolution because they were unhappy with wars and the Tsar and their economy and the class system that had been happening. And so that's how we're going to tie it back to our thesis, talking about why we're calling this an age of revolution. And then you'll repeat, another piece of evidence, another explanation, another tie back to thesis. So each body paragraph should have a topic sentence: evidence, explanation, tie back to thesis, evidence, explanation, tie back to thesis, and then a transition into your next paragraph. And that's the format that your body paragraphs are going to follow. Again, maybe 120 words if you're using solid evidence. It's going to take up a good portion of your paragraph, and your explanation should take up a good portion of your paragraph also, because you can't just throw facts into an essay, you do have to explain them. Finally, for your conclusion paragraph, it's going to be very, very similar to your introductory paragraph. You're just going to summarize what you've said. You'll restate your main points, which again are the social, economic, and political issues, your thesis, and you're going to tie it back to your introduction. So again, if you're starting with historical information, it might be a good idea to say, well, the early 1900s was kind of this age of the revolution. It led us into what later became the almost age of dissolution where we ended up in another world war and everything kind of went downhill quickly. But again, that information should tie back to your introductory paragraph. Now finally, before you start writing, I do have some do's and don'ts for you here. Do reread for clarity. I always encourage my students, particularly after you've finished an essay, to reread everything you've written out loud. I think it helps you catch any grammatical errors or awkward sentences, because when you read it out loud, you have to slow down and actually hear what you're saying. So I really encourage you to take time and do that. It'll take you maybe 5 minutes, and it will make your essay significantly better. Don't assume that one draft is perfection. Don't get upset if I kick your essay back to you and say, hey, here are some suggestions. I'd really like to see XYZ changes. That's for your benefit, because that means your grade is going to go up when you make those adjustments. So if you're unhappy with that, remember, if you just turn in that essay the same as it was, your grade's going to suffer. So do keep that in mind, that I do that for your benefit, to make you a better writer and to get you a better grade. Do explain and give relevant evidence. It's kind of irrelevant if you say during the Meiji Restoration, 800 million people were killed. Well, that's a very significant number of people. However, that's just a pure fact. It doesn't tell me anything. 800 million people where? In the world? In Japan? Were the Japanese killing each other? You need to explain your evidence to make it relevant. Don't use personal pronouns or talk about your essay as an entity. A great example of this is I was reading a brilliant essay the other day, and it started out with, for my topic, I've chosen to analyze theme. It seems silly to do this, because later on in the essay it says in that introductory paragraph, how these stories address the theme, and it was a really smart essay, but because that first introductory sentence, it really puts kind of a damper on the whole essay, because there's no need to introduce an essay that way. You shouldn't use personal pronouns. You should never say, in my essay I'm going to, or today this essay will, or my essay. Just don't talk about your essay as an entity, and don't use your personal pronouns. Just start writing. Start with your historical introduction. And then also do cite your sources and put your information into quotes. Again, if it seems like a lot of your information is coming from outside sources, or outside research, and you don't cite those sources and say, hey, this is where it came from, I have to assume that you're copying that information and plagiarizing and give you a 0. So to avoid that issue, make sure you're putting that information into quotation marks and citing your sources at the end of your essay, so I know what you've written and what information has come from an external source, and I don't have to assume the worst. So that's it. If you have any questions about your Age of Revolutions essay, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in class.